Oop, I just grabbed both.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. If you like that intro and you want to help out the channel in any way, you can check out any of the links in the description. I actually recently opened up my own company, so if you like those targets that you saw in the intro, I'm actually selling those targets through my own company, Focus Shooting LLC. It's the first link in the description below. And if you want, there's also Subscribestar, and you can of course like, share, and subscribe to the channel. All that sort of stuff helps out. Now, today we're going to be talking about a very cool little upper receiver. And for the YouTube sensor watching, this is not a firearm. This is just a hunk of different metal components slapped together, and it is in its original configuration. So as you can tell from the intro and just by looking at it, this is a very short, very compact 9mm upper receiver. So what we have here is a bunch of actually fairly cool components, especially for a 9mm, for a very, very good price. So let's go ahead and we're going to talk about the bolt carrier group and charging handle first. The bolt carrier group is actually from United Defense Labs. They're a very budget manufacturer, but 9mm bolts are extremely easy. You don't really care about the staking on top on the gas key, even though it literally just keeps it in line so that the bolt carrier does not move left and right. You don't really care about that because it's not getting impacted, it's not getting moving, it's just moving back and forth with your bolt. And in terms of slide serrations, there aren't any slide serrations on it. There is no ejector because this is utilizing a fixed ejector on the lower or the mag block itself. So all you have on here is an extractor, and the extractor pulling out 9mm is very, very easy. So in terms of design, Blowback 9mm bolts are incredibly easy. They're not really complex. The only thing that's really different about them is the gas key is of course not a gas key. It's just something that's literally bolted on to keep the carrier straight. And then of course you have an extra weight. I believe this is just a steel weight. It's not a tungsten weight. So I think it adds like an extra 3 ounces on the back of it to bring your weight up to about 19-20 ounces on the bolt carrier group itself. So it's slightly heavier to delay that blowback because of course there is no delay mechanism, there is no gas settings, there's no roller delaying, there's no rocker system, nothing on it. All that happens when you pull that trigger is of course the bolt starts to recoil just due to the force of the 9mm projectile exiting the barrel. So all that happens is that this goes right back, picks up the next shell, and goes forward. Now this is a hybrid bolt carrier group, so this one here will actually work with Colt magazines and Glock magazines. I was using it exclusively with Colt magazines and had zero issues with the bolt carrier group. You can find these bolt carrier groups generally with 9mm. You're not looking for anything special as long as they have a nice finish on them and they're built to spec and they're heavy enough to delay that opening. You're looking at about anywhere from $100 on the cheap end to maybe $150 for a nicer one, although again it's just a 9mm. They're very, very simple and not very complex. And the charging handle that came with it is just a mil-spec 7075 charging handle, so nothing special, nothing to write home about there. Alrighty, now let's move on to the upper receiver itself, and this is actually one of the nicer components on it. What we have is it's not a forged upper receiver, this is actually a billet upper receiver, and it's what they call their slab side. So basically all that means is that the sides are very minimalistic. The machining on them is really good. So it's not a really heavy billet upper receiver. Generally speaking, billet is a little bit heavier and not quite as strong, though again, we're only talking about 9mm, so we're not dealing with all that much pressure. So what we have here, it's a slab side, so there is no forward assist, which of course on a 9mm bolt doesn't have any forward assist serrations, so you're not gonna need that at all. So it actually works really well in that regard. The only thing that I'm not a huge fan of on the upper receiver, at least in 9mm, is the fact that it does have a full-size ejection port and a full-size ejection door that is actually labeled AR-15, which is about as subtle as a damage tattoo on Jared Leto's Joker. Another really nice thing about the upper receiver is that it mates to the handguard really well. Speaking of the handguard, it is a very simple M-lock handguard. It uses a clamping method on the bottom. It is M-lock. It is technically 4 inches long, which is actually much longer than the 9mm barrel. So the 9mm barrel only actually goes to about right here underneath the actual handguard. So you will need something to push your muzzle device out a little further. We'll talk about that in just a second. So it's a very simple aluminum handguard. It's perfectly long enough for this design. It's only 4 inches, but it does have M-lock on all sides, so it is 7-sided for the M-lock if you wanted to attach a bunch of stuff to it for whatever reason. You do have enough space up top to mount lights, backup iron sights, and an optic, although I did also run this with the EOTech 512, which, as you can tell, takes up about 60% of your rail space. So if you're using longer optics, it's going to be much harder to fit on iron sights, lasers, lights, whatever you want. But if you're using a more micro style optic, like this Holosun 507C, you can actually fit lights, lasers, and backup iron sights all on your top rail. Now, we've already mentioned it, but the barrel itself is a 4-inch barrel. It's a KAK Industries 4-inch barrel. It's actually a really high quality barrel. Generally speaking, the barrels go for about $100 by themselves. Only 4 inches long, has a 1 in 10 twist, which is excellent for 9mm for stabilizing a wide variety of loads. We'll talk about accuracy a little bit later. Something to note about 9mm barrels, a 4-inch 9mm barrel is actually much shorter than like a 4-inch AR-15 barrel in different calibers. Because the chamber is so short on a 9mm, the barrel only sticks out of the receiver about 3.5 inches. So it is a 4-inch barrel, but it is very, very short and very compact. So for instance, with this 4-inch handguard, I could actually fit a 5.5-inch 6-inch barrel very flush, not including the muzzle device. Now, the last component on here is actually the muzzle device. The muzzle device that they shipped with it was a flash can. However, it was in the 1/2 by 28 thread pitch, and I needed the 1/2 by 30 for this 9mm barrel from KAK Industries. So I went ahead and threw on an adapter with a 9mm A2 birdcage, which is an excellent muzzle device for 9mm. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So that, with the adapter, allowed it to push the tines just barely past the front handguard, which is why I have this hand stop back just a little bit. I could reverse it and give my hands a little bit of extra room, but because these tines are so close to the edge here, I like to keep my thumb back in this range right here. Now, for those of you who don't know, I actually have purchased 2 upper receivers, or 2 9mm upper receivers from Delta Team Tactical. The first one that I had was a 7.5-inch barrel with a quad rail, which was really, really cool. I put about 1,000 rounds through that with absolutely no malfunctions. It functioned very, very well, even after throwing it in mud multiple times. I have a video up on the channel of that. That one performed excellently, but in my 10,000 subscriber giveaway, I gave away one of my upper receivers, and he chose that upper receiver. So I had to get another one, so I went ahead and went with a little bit of a shorter design, and as you'll see from the intro, this actually does fit in a backpack in its shortest configuration, which is really nice. Now, in terms of round count, we're a little bit over 1,000 rounds on this upper receiver as well. I pretty much burned through the last of my Wolf 9mm on this, but I decided to go ahead and do some more testing on it because I also needed to do testing on the EOTech 512 and the Holosun 507C, so I thought I'd put more rounds on this upper receiver because it is incredibly fun to shoot. So we have a little bit over 1,000 rounds, and this upper receiver has functioned 100% flawlessly. I have had some issues with ejection on this, but it's not the upper receiver's fault, because of course the ejector is actually fixed in the lower receiver, or in this case the Guntec Mag block adapter, which is absolutely awful. I haven't had any feeding issues, I haven't had really any magazine related issues. I have had some ejection issues, and that's because I actually had to bend that ejector to get it to fit in the channel of the bolt carrier group so it could eject the shell. So I need to do a little bit more fine tuning with it to make sure that it's ejecting properly, and it will be eventually replaced with a dedicated Colt lower receiver so that I don't have that issue in the future, and it's a little bit more high quality than the Guntec, which, as I've talked before, is a very poor quality mag block adapter, though it does work most of the time. So like I said, 1,000 rounds through this upper receiver, no cleaning. I did lube it at the beginning, but no additional lube was added to it, and it functioned exactly as it should. And that's because 9mm blowback is incredibly simple. There's no gas system, there's nothing funky going on. It has a fixed ejector most of the time, which is more reliable than something that's built into your bolt carrier group, which will wear down over time. The main factors for getting a reliable 9mm blowback, especially in the AR9 platform, is actually your buffer setup and of course your ammunition. So when you're using really low powered ammunition, especially if you have a stronger, stiffer buffer setup, then you might not be able to get that reliable cycling like you want. Now, my buffer setup that I was running was actually an enhanced power spring designed for 9mm, so they say it's like 15% stronger than a standard carbine buffer, and of course a Guntec 9mm buffer, which is actually a tungsten solid buffer. It's 8.2 ounces, so it's extremely heavy. It's about 2.5 times the standard weight of a carbine buffer, and that gives it a very smooth, very slow recoil impulse for a 9mm blowback, where of course there is no delay mechanism. Now, one thing that I will mention is that in my other upper receiver, not this one in particular, I was having some issues cycling aluminum cased ammunition because it is of course the weakest of the weakest ammunition. So every now and again my buffer setup was a little bit too strong for that, so it wouldn't quite cycle all the way. However, in this with Wolf and probably about 800 rounds of steel cased ammunition, cycled perfectly through it. So steel cased ammunition, perfectly fine. It's definitely on the lower end of power, but anything hotter that you're putting through it is going to cycle a little bit better as well. Now let's go ahead and talk about the barrel, the accuracy, and terminal performance of 9mm. So this barrel, with everything I tested it with, grouped at or under 1.5 inches at 25 yards. So I did 115 grain Wolf, I did 115 grain Winchester White Box, I did 124 grain Scorpio, and then I also did 147 grain Speer, and all grouped under 1.5 inches at 25 yards with 5-shot groups. Now the farthest that I've stretched this out to is about 150 yards standing, and I've had multiple shooters do it with this barrel with just cheap Wolf ammunition. Still extremely accurate, and 150 yards is much further than the effective range of 9mm in general, but you can definitely do it with a platform like this. It is extremely accurate. The cack barrel in here is again a very high quality barrel. It's a very thick, heavy barrel, so in terms of 9mm it gives you about the best accuracy that you can get. Now, in terms of performance with the 9mm cartridge, in my opinion, barrel length doesn't really matter beyond the 4 to 5 inch mark. You're getting about 90% of the performance that you can out of it. For instance, between a 4-inch barrel and a 16-inch barrel, which is about the biggest spread you can get, you're only picking up about 150, 200 FPS with certain loads, and even less with heavier ammunition. You're picking up maybe 50 to 100 FPS with heavier ammunition. So, for 99% of situations, a 4-inch barrel is perfectly fine. It's basically the exact same length that's on my Glock 17. And of course for its appropriate distances of 25 yards and in most of the time, although of course it can stretch its legs quite a bit. You could probably stretch this out to 300 yards if you really wanted to, with an optic on it with enough drop. Now for me, the main advantage of going with a 4-inch barrel is one, it's very short and compact, which allows it to fit into normal sized backpacks that don't have to look super tactical. That's just a normal school backpack that I picked up that has a ton of extra space inside. So it fits this guy on my lower, which I might as well go ahead and put on for you right now. So this is the configuration that I've had it in for most of the time. One thing that's really nice about this upper and lower is that there is actually zero flex. They are incredibly tight to get together, so there is zero flex between the upper and the lower, which is really nice, and it just feels a little bit higher quality, even though the lower receiver on here is just an Anderson with a Guntec Mag adapter, which, as I mentioned, is pretty bad, but it does work most of the time. One thing I do want to mention really quickly that gets brought up all the time when talking about 9mm AR9 specifically is that they recoil a lot. And while that is true that they have a very violent, a very fast recoil impulse, what most people don't get about them is that the recoil impulse is just that. It's very fast. So it happens and then it's over very quickly. So for instance, I put this up against my POF MP5 at 10 and 25 yards, and basically the recoil did not really make a difference because the 9mm AR does this. It bounces up and down, and as long as you're managing your recoil and you're pulling it tight against your shoulder, it will pretty much come back down to the exact same spot as fast as you can fire. So I did a couple of drills as fast as I could with this super cheap AR9 versus the POF MP5 at 7 yards and at 25 yards. So I did 5 rounds as fast as I could, twice with each gun at those distances. Ooh, a little bit of trigger freeze there. Alrighty, so that was 5 rounds in 1.60, which is actually pretty slow. Perfect, all on. Alrighty, so that was 5 rounds in a 1.24, much better. Alrighty, so that was 5 rounds in a 1.32, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's technically still on the paper, but it's outside of the box. Perfect group. So 5 rounds right on top of each other, pretty much perfect. Alrighty, first round in a 0.88, which is really slow, but overall time in 1.96. Alrighty, so that was 5 in 1.94, so almost identical. 8.4 first, and then 3.8, 2.8, 2.2, 2.2. So okay, let's see how it does with the AR9 now. Alrighty, so that was actually a little faster, so that was in a 1.86. And again in a 190 first. And really the times were almost identical, as well as the group size. So yes, the recoil is fast and violent on an AR9, but as long as you know what you're doing and it's set up properly, it's very, very easy to control. So that's really about it, guys. This gun does just about everything that I want it to do, with very, very few exceptions. There's some slight ergonomic issues, and I don't like the mag block, but that again is not a fault of the upper receiver. Now it should be mentioned that this upper receiver and the bolt carrier group and charging handle were actually two separate deals. So the bolt carrier group and charging handle was $100. I think I got it on a pretty good price at $100 for that combo. And then the upper receiver, which I actually had to assemble myself, which again, they're very, very easy to assemble. It's low pressure, there's no gas system, so you just tighten it down appropriately and you're pretty much good to go. So I had to assemble the upper receiver. I think the upper receiver was $194. I think the name of it is Grackle, the upper receiver, and then of course the bolt carrier combo with the charging handle. So it brought the total cost up to about $300 for the entire upper receiver as you see it. But as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I did not pay full price for this. I did get it at a slightly discounted rate, closer to cost for them, which is actually a really, really fair price. A lot better than some other companies. So that's about it for the video, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like I mentioned in the beginning, if you want to help out the channel in any way, you can check out any of the links down below. If you need AR500 steel targets, or if you want to subscribe on Subscribestar, or of course just like, share, and subscribe to this channel itself. So thank you guys once again for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.